We're going to call this meeting to order, this hearing to order. And first, I'd like to welcome Justin Barron to our committee as one of our newest consultants on the Transportation Committee. Now that you've had plenty of time to rest between our floor session and this hearing, and I hope you're well rested because we're ready to rock and roll, I want to thank everyone for being here today. And as we head into the final days of session this year, we're working hard to pull a deal together to provide new dollars for transportation. While the focus of the special funding is a fix-it first, and another major component of the funding package has to address the state's needs related to goods movement. Today's hearing is intended to inform this part of the discussion. Goods movement is critical, and I repeat critical, to California's competitive edge. It affects all of us, not just those of us in this room who are intimately involved with transportation, but really everyone in California, all over the United States and around the globe. There has been a lot of activity in the world of goods movement, beginning with the federal MAP 21, which included, for the first time, the beginnings of a national freight program. In California, the State Transportation Agency released a state freight plan late last year, and ARB is in the midst of developing a sustainable freight strategy. And now we have the governor's executive order calling for those plans to be pulled into one cohesive document by next year, middle of the year. All of this is on top of the extensive work already done by the regions, most of whom have addressed freight in their regional planning documents. We're going to hear from all of these folks today. In addition, and maybe most importantly, we are also going to hear from our customers, the folks that use the system every day. Who better to ask how things are working or what needs to be fixed than the customers and the experts in their field? We were successful in passing a funding package God, I wish that was true, though. If we were successful in passing a funding package, and believe me, we will be, then we must develop a freight program that is sustainable and supports a vibrant economy. We must make wise investments. We want to make sure that the money that gets raised is put toward the highest and best use, that we get the biggest bang for our buck, both environmentally and the economy. So let's begin the hearing. I'd like to call up Secretary Kelly. Good afternoon, Secretary, and welcome. Thank you for coming.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having me here today. I appreciate the opportunity to comment on, is there any way to get that? You're definitely on the spot. Yeah. Blinded by the light. That works. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, again, Brian Kelly with the California State Transportation Agency. I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here today and talk to you all about the administration's efforts to improve California's trade corridors consistent with work that the state began back in 2006 with the passage of Proposition 1B. By way of background, and I know, Mr. Chairman, you're well versed in this area, but worth providing a little information to others that, California has a very complex and vast network, freight network, that is very important to the state's economic health. Freight-dependent industries account for over $700 billion in revenue and employed some 5 million Californians in 2013. More than 15,000 miles of highways and freeways carry billions of tons of freight annually. 12 cargo airports carry more than 3 million tons of freight per year. California leads the nation with 12 cargo seaports as well, and the state's freight railroads operate over 5,000 miles of track. And of course, California is home to 3 of the nation's 5 busiest seaports, handling over 40% of containerized cargo entering the United States. With all of that, well-functioning trade corridors are necessary for California to maintain its global leadership in trade. The governor recognizes the importance of trade and has taken 4 important steps to move the issue forward in California. First, in September of 2014, he signed SB 1228 by Senator Hueso to keep in the law the Trade Corridor Improvement Fund as a repository for state funds targeted to improving California's freight system and trade corridors. In December of 2014, the administration released the initial California Freight Mobility Plan, which I will describe in a little more detail later, and which starts the process of prioritizing investments in our trade system to ensure we meet our economic, energy, mobility, safety, and sustainability goals. On July 16th of this year, the governor signed Executive Order B 3215, calling for the Transportation Agency, Resources Agency, Cal EPA, the relevant departments, and the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, or GOBIZ, to work with stakeholders to develop an integrated action plan for investing in our freight system by July of 2016. This integrated plan is designed to ensure that California has one plan to improve freight efficiency, transition to cleaner technologies, and increase the competitiveness of California's freight system. And of course, most recently, as you know, Mr. Chair, the administration has consistently called for a new transportation funding plan to include dedicated investments in California's trade corridors. A little bit about the California Freight Mobility Plan, and I think you either have or will have shortly a little brochure that summarizes the plan. In 2013, this legislature passed and the governor signed AB 14, which directed my agency to complete a freight mobility plan to address California's freight infrastructure needs and priorities by the end of 2014. In addition, as part of the federal MAP 21 legislation, the federal government encourages states to adopt freight plans in order to be eligible for up to 95% federal funding for improvements on interstate highways and 90% federal funding for improvements on non-interstate trade corridors. The initial plan, developed with a committee of key industry stakeholders, environmental groups, business leaders, local government, labor, and legislative representatives, was adopted in December of 2014. The plan identifies routes and transportation facilities that are critical to California's economic growth and are of high priority for investment to meet federal and state transportation and air quality goals. It also defines a vision for California's freight system and serves as a catalyst for freight planning at all planning levels with its 6 primary goals. One goal, economic competitiveness, improve the state's freight system to support economic productivity, efficiency, and competitiveness. Congestion relief in key trade corridors, reduce costs to users and improve productivity by minimizing congested corridors. A safe and secure freight system, improving the safety and security and resiliency of the state's freight system. Preservation of vital freight infrastructure, improving the state of good repair along California's trade corridors, consistent with our broader fix-it-first philosophy. Innovation, using new technologies and practices to optimize system efficiency while reducing environmental and community impacts. And of course, more broadly, environmental stewardship, broadly reducing adverse impacts to the environment and communities from the conduct of trade, particularly those communities located near trade centers. The plan's vision recognizes that all modes must be included in freight planning in order to achieve a truly integrated intermodal freight network that achieves our collective objectives in the areas of environmental, energy, mobility, and economy. It's worth mentioning, too, that the law requires the plan to be updated at least every 5 years. By way of background, the first time the state of California focused public investment on trade corridors in a comprehensive way was in Proposition 1B with the Trade Corridor Improvement Fund. That was a $2.4 billion program that improved rail, highway, and port infrastructure. The state dollars were leveraged on a better than 2-to-1 basis, and the $2.4 billion provided by the bond measure and the state highway account funded 83 freight projects valued at more than $7 billion. Proposition 1B and its Trade Corridor Improvement Fund was a successful public investment program. The California Freight Mobility Plan is intended to build on the success of Prop 1B and provide a foundation for a broader, unified freight policy that seeks to improve trade corridors and the efficiency of freight movement so important to our economic future. The administration understands the need for one statewide freight plan capable of meeting multiple objectives as called for by the California Transportation Commission. As noted earlier, and toward that end, the governor issued an executive order directing his administration to develop one integrated freight strategy for California. Several agencies will work with stakeholders to develop that plan by July 2016 that establishes clear targets to improve freight efficiency, transition to zero-emission technologies, and increase the competitiveness of our freight system. You will hear more about this effort from Executive Director Richard Corey from the California Air Resources Board in the following presentation. And finally, in closing, Mr. Chair and members, I just say that well-functioning and efficient trade corridors are important to enable California to meet the coming demand in the area of freight. We have the largest gateway of international trade and domestic commerce in the nation. The unemployment rate in California has declined to the lowest point in over 5 years, and the manufacturing industry has added jobs for 3 straight years, the first time California had consecutive years of manufacturing job gains in over a decade. This welcomed economic growth will undoubtedly add to the demand for a more efficient and innovative freight system in California. California has consistently shown effective leadership in tackling environmental challenges while expanding economic opportunity. We can and have achieved gains in both areas simultaneously through smart policy and sound implementation of those policies. In just the last decade, we invested Proposition 1B funds in the area of trade to both construct 83 projects that improved congested roadways, ports, and railways, while at the same time reducing the amount of diesel soot emitted from trade activities by 50%. We look forward to achieving similar outcomes as we move forward. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Any questions of the committee of Mr. Kelly? Seeing none, Mr. Kelly, thank you so much for coming forward today and presenting. And I look forward to you on collaboration and working through the economic and also the environmental aspects of the movement of goods and services. So
absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members.
Thank you. Next, we'll move over to Mr. Richard Corey, the Executive Officer of the California Air Resources Board. Good afternoon, sir. And please proceed when you are ready.
Am I on? Perfect. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here with you and talk about freight. And as Secretary Kelly emphasized, the Governor's July executive order on freight underscores the administration's strong, unified commitment to improving California's freight transport system and recognizes the need for the broad participation by public and private entities, a critical element. California's sustainable freight strategy is driven by a need to achieve significant emission reductions from the freight sector in a manner that strengthens the economy, creates jobs, improves mobility, and protects public health for all Californians. California's freight transport system is complex. We know this. It depends on interactions between equipment, infrastructure, and facilities. The vehicles and equipment that move freight range from aircraft and ocean-going vessels for international transport to locomotives and trucks for interstate transport and smaller trucks and harbor craft for in-state operations. The emissions from this network of activity remain a large contributor to air pollution and currently account for half the statewide diesel PM emissions, approximately 45% of the statewide NOx or ozone-forming pollutants, and 6% of statewide greenhouse gas emissions. Now, for decades, California has been an international leader in developing innovative programs to cut pollution and protect public health. And we've done it while growing into one of the largest economies on the planet. And since our carbon market has gone into operation, overall job growth in California has increased by over 3%, outpacing the rest of the country. Our state also reaps a lion's share of private investment in clean technology. For example, in 2012, we benefited from more than $2 billion in clean tech venture capital, more than the rest of the other 49 states combined. And since 2005, we've also seen real-world benefits on the order of 50 to 80% drop in diesel particulate matter and measurably cleaner air in ports and rail yard communities. 50 to 80% drop in about a 9 to 10-year period. The progress has been remarkable, and it's the product of the efforts of the ARB, air districts, ports, and many others. But I have to, in particular, mention the important partnership that we've had with the ports. It's been a critical partnership here. Yet, several factors point to the need to accelerate progress in reducing emissions from freight. A new risk assessment methodology from the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment tells us that infants and children are even more sensitive to harmful effects of exposure to air toxics, like those emitted from freight equipment, than previously understood. And meeting our health-based national ambient air quality standards, federal ozone and PM 2.5 standards in the South Coast and San Joaquin will require significant new reductions over the next 15 years. Based on a consideration of additional health studies, the U.S. EPA is also proposing more stringent standards for ozone that will require further reductions. While we're well on our way to meeting the 2020 greenhouse gas reduction target established by AB 32, the scientific community agrees that we need to limit global warming to about pre-industrial levels in order to prevent more catastrophic climate disruptions. This necessitates about an 80% reduction below 1990 levels by 2050. To build on the state's momentum and establish a path to achieving the 2050 target, Governor Brown established an executive order this spring establishing a target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 40% below levels in 2030. Actually, 40% below the 1990 levels by 2030, an ambitious but achievable target. Looking at the sum of the parts, it's clear that for transportation, we must move to zero emissions everywhere possible and near zero emissions with renewable fuels everywhere else. That's driving our technology advancement effort, our fuels policies, and our freight discussions. For freight, this imperative is carried forward in a report ARB staff released this past April on initial steps to advance California towards a zero and near zero emission freight transportation system. The report builds on stakeholder engagement and technology assessment efforts ARB undertook in 2014, where ARB staff engaged over 220 stakeholder organizations representing cargo owners, the logistics industry, labor, seaports, utilities, business leaders, environmental and community groups, agencies of all levels of government, and other interested stakeholders to discuss the need for and approaches to achieving a sustainable freight transport system. The path identifies actions for both the immediate and near term, where development work would start either this year or next, with implementation to occur within the next 5 years. These actions include regulation, incentive programs, and data collection. For example, developing modifications to our existing incentive program to increase support for zero and near zero emission technologies used in freight operations, and collecting further data on freight facilities so that we can better identify the best opportunities for further reductions. Beyond immediate and near-term measures, the document also identifies a vision and broad-based concepts for additional freight system transformation. These are longer-term exploratory concepts that will be the subject of further evaluation. ARB's focus on the next year will be to work with our state agency partners, several of which are represented here today: California State Transportation Agency, Natural Resources Agency, Cal EPA, Caltrans, Energy Commission, and the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development to engage a broad group of stakeholders to integrate this work into a joint action plan, the Sustainable Freight Strategy that was just mentioned, as called for in the Governor Brown executive order. The success and effectiveness of this joint strategy will rest on identifying win-win opportunities, including strategic freight investments that advance the state's multiple objectives. To this end, the state is initiating work with industry stakeholders to help identify actions that will improve system-wide freight efficiencies and the economic competitiveness of our logistics system. Identifying pilot projects is also one of the goals of this effort. We'll work to identify some specific areas that state government can effectively integrate technology, alternative fuels, freight, and fuel infrastructure, local development opportunities. AIR-B recognizes that California can only meet its air quality and climate needs if we align transportation and energy infrastructure to support a zero and near zero emission freight system, both in time and space. And in closing, we've come a long way, but we must do more. It's clear that the environmental, transportation, energy, and economic objectives of transforming the freight system are interdependent on one another, and the success of one depends on the success of all. We look forward to continue to work with our state partners on engaging with industry, local agencies, and others on a joint action plan. And with that, thank you for the opportunity, and I'm available to answer questions.
Any committee members have any questions of our panelists? Seeing none, I do have a couple questions, sir. Well, it's wonderful to have these goals. What is AIR-B's purpose in creating opportunity for R&D to make sure that these zero-emission vehicles are actually attainable? How much money is the agency putting into research and development to make this happen?
So with respect to the freight sector, the heavy-duty sector, so light-duty sector, cars, for instance, there's also many commercialized zero-emission vehicles are being purchased, several thousand, or at least a month, every month. So I'm going to respond in the context of freight, in the context of demonstration projects. So it's a really good point to ask the question of where there are opportunities in the freight sector for promoting, facilitating clean technologies. Clean technologies, for instance, a zero-emission cargo lift at a port, for instance, where you could electrify, thereby reducing diesel PM, reducing NOx, the formation, the pollutants that contribute to ozone. So one of the things that we've included as part of the clean freight effort is a solicitation process for demonstration projects that have to go through a full public solicitation and identify where those viable opportunities are, and the viable opportunities for reducing local risk, for instance, at a distribution center is in my example, but also to build on a platform. In other words, and this is a fundamental question, that's why it's subject to review and analysis, is does that demonstration project advance the application of that technology to move it forward from a commercialization standpoint? And the way that we've done that from a process standpoint going forward is laying out a vision, going through a full public solicitation process, and publishing data in terms of what kind of results we're seeing. And that model has worked before, and we believe from a heavy-duty application it will going forward.
So my question is, how much money yearly goes into research and development to make these goals attainable?
I'm going to
from the agency's perspective.
So I'm going to answer in the context of the an element of this is the appropriation for clean transportation, which included the GGRF funds. There was about $80 million for demonstration projects on the heavy-duty side. So that is a very focused example. There are some others, but that's a specific answer to your question.
So what I'm looking forward to is a collaborative effort with industry as a perspective when we look at one size does not fit all. We have different components of transportation through freight and short haul, long haul, and that we look and listen to their perspective as being the experts also and embracing their willingness to be part of that solution. So I look forward to that dialogue moving forward.
I very much appreciate the comment and the fact that the point you just made is a key point, and it's one of the key differences between what I call the light-duty sector, cars, for instance, versus the heavy-duty sector. The heavy-duty sector, you have a broad range of equipment, from cargo handling equipment to forklifts to local truck hauls to interstate truck hauls. And the point you made is spot on. One solution doesn't get it done. In some cases, for instance, electrification will work. It won't work in others. In some cases, hybridization will work. It won't work necessarily in others. In a number of cases where, for instance, you stay in diesel, the application or use of renewable diesel. So it's going to be key to work with partners, the partners that are here and others, to really identify where are those opportunities and where are the right and appropriate solutions. But that's absolutely on.
I appreciate it. And one final question. There's a bill that's out there that looks for a reduction in petroleum by 50%. How does the cap and trade work if there's a reduction in money coming forward?
Well, cap and trade basically is predicated on ultimately a declining cap, right? So it has a declining cap, so it contributes to GHG reductions in the program. Part of that, it includes, a fraction of it includes state allowances that are auctioned as part of our solution from a GHG reduction standpoint. So if you play out, and there's a lot of variables even in answering that question in terms of what's an allowance go for and how many are auctioned. But it's possible, and down the road, the program, there's less dollars in the long run for the generated from cap and trade proceeds. But the only thing I wanted to add to that question, it's a broader response, but it's an important one. With respect to the strategies that translate into a reduction in petroleum, it really goes to the point that you made on heavy duty. It's not just one strategy. It's reducing VMT. It's transition to renewable or cleaner alternative energy sources. It's improved efficiency. It's all those things working together, not one solution. It's a multiplicity of them.
Thank you very much for your candor. I look forward to working with you moving forward on how we can attain a goal that all of us want, is cleaner air.
We do as well. Thank you.
Thank you.